Good morning, good evening, wherever and whenever you may be. I'm SpiderDevice, and welcome to Web Talks. This is Web Talks Episode 4, The Pressure Vessel. In this episode, we'll be defining what a pressure vessel is, how to implement one in the shooter configuration, showing the internal workings of a pressure vessel, and explaining the GPM 3.0 concept. Let's start off by defining what the pressure vessel is. This is the container that holds the web formula, or fluid as it were, under high pressure and has some mechanism that interfaces with the shooter, allowing the formula to exit the vessel on command of the shooter's user. That seems simple enough, but there are several methods that can be used to do this, and we're going to talk about those today. Granted, I'm just going to be focusing on the pressure vessel this time. This is a closely related piece to the trigger and release valve, and those two will be discussed in later episodes, but this simply covers the pressure vessel's workings in and of itself, and that ignores all the caveats of the release valve or your trigger that might be on your shooter specifically. So let's talk about the ways in which the pressure vessel has been portrayed in Spider-Man media. The original shooters had rectangular prismatic pressure vessels that slipped into a slot on his shooter. The vessels then later got a curved contour to them to conform to the curvature of Spider-Man's arm. A small nipple on the front of the vessel was opened by a small needle valve, and as the pressure was released, the formula would shoot out of the vessel. Now, the internal workings of this are never really explained, but then again you have to factor in the concept of suspension of disbelief here. But carrying on, the next biggest portrayal of the pressure vessel is in the 2012 Amazing Spider-Man film. Now here we see sort of a dual conjoined cylinder type design that we see has actual re-engineered spider silk constricted and compressed inside the pressure vessel, bringing it down to its smallest possible volume and highest possible density. Then we can infer that once the valve is open and the web is exposed to the atmosphere, it begins to expand again and is extruded outward by this force, controlled by a turbine-like mechanism, which would reinforce the promotional web shooter photos and other material that we've seen. But when it comes to the validity of these concepts, the comics idea I can't really comment on too thoroughly, because we don't really know the complete inner workings of the vessels, but what I can say is that they couldn't really be rectangular or the contoured shape, or at least not in any practical way. When applying high pressure to something that small and that shape, it would honestly either burst or it would expand into a cylindrical shape anyway, similar to Ben Reilly's Scarlet Spider shooters. Now, for the movie shooter and just having a condensed formula expand, that would honestly work. If you check the description, there's an article to a certain police foam that's been used for detaining people in riots. This is actually not that different from the web formula that we're trying to achieve in and of itself, though this substance lacks any real elasticity. But this substance is able to expand to an incredible degree, in a very short amount of time. Undoubtedly, the pressure created from this would also allow the extruded form to be pushed out at a significant rate. I've never tested anything like this myself, so I couldn't really attest to its effectiveness, but as it stands, it could actually work. But once again, the pressure vessel in the films would probably expand out to a full cylinder type shape with the high pressure. Now, just to go over the basic workings of how a pressure vessel operates, let's quickly cover the concept of equilibrium. When you have two containers of different pressures, they're going to want to form an equilibrium, meaning that if they're exposed to each other, the pressure will want to become the same inside both containers, equaling out between the two. That means if you have a high pressure container, like your pressure vessel, it's going to want to form an equilibrium with the ambient atmosphere when you shoot, since it will be exposed to the pressure on the outside. So the way to relieve the pressure is to eliminate some of the substance within the higher pressure container and move it to the lower pressure container. This will happen through the output of the pressure vessel. Now, just to recap quickly, when you have two containers, they'll want to form an equilibrium, meaning the pressure of both containers will want to be the same. This will happen by bringing some of the contents of the higher pressure container, in this case the pressure vessel, into the lower pressure container, which in this case is the environment in which you're shooting, and this will cause the shooting of the formula. Now that that's out of the way, we'll talk about the basic ways of creating a pressure vessel. So, I want to make a basic pressure vessel. What do I need, and how do I use these components? Well, the first thing you're going to need is a base. Now, this is going to be what you basically make your pressure vessel out of. This is going to be the part that holds the fluid and retains the pressure that you apply. More than likely, you're going to want to use something cylindrical, because as I explained, it'll be less prone to deforming or bursting when pressure is applied. Now, you can use anything from a simple bit of PVC tubing to a spray bottle, aerosol can, all the way up to the larger forms like a 2-liter soda bottle or weed spraying can like I used in my design. You're going to want to find your own preferred form factor, whether you want a tank you wear separately from the shooter or if you want a smaller vessel that attaches directly to the shooter. It all comes down to really your own personal preference. You want to find your own preferred balance between the size of the vessel and the amount of fluid that you want to carry. But once you've got that figured out, you're going to want to find out what your release mechanism will be. Now don't confuse this with a release valve, which is a separate part of the shooter that I'll talk about at some other time. While the release mechanism can be a valve, I'm still going to refer to it simply as the release mechanism. The release valve is something we'll talk about, of course, in a different video. So what is the release mechanism? This is the part of the pressure vessel that allows the fluid to escape when the user wants. Now this would probably be a good time to discuss the first and most common way of making a pressure vessel as a whole. The first way is to basically recreate an aerosol can, and this method is the exact way that spray bottles and the weed sprayer can, like I used, work. It's all the same concept. So, you have the liquid inside this container. You also have a straw that's only ever opened by the release mechanism. You have a bunch of propellant gas, which is the gas inserted into the vessel in order to pressurize it. And that gets put in, and that creates a highly pressurized container. When the release valve is activated, the equilibrium needs to be created. And there's only one place for this internal content to go, and that's up and out of this straw. The straw is dipping into the liquid, and that's what escapes. So, you've probably, if you're looking at the diagram on the screen, you've probably already noticed what the main problem would be with this, but if you haven't, we'll discuss that a little bit later on. But let's continue with how to build this. So what can we use for the release mechanism here? Well, it's honestly really anything that will close up the pressure vessel to the outside world. However, if you guys want, I can make a different video, like a small talks video, telling you how to build your own little release mechanism, but it would basically just be the same as if you went to the store, bought yourself a spray bottle of eyeglasses cleaner, took that atomizer piece off the lid, and there you go. There's your release mechanism. And I can tell you how to build that one in a different video if you all want. So let me know in the comments if you want that release mechanism building video. So all that does is when you push down on the spring, this springy part, fluid will release. You'll then have to find some kind of threaded cap to attach this lid to your pressure vessel. So once you've got your main pressure vessel with the release mechanism attached, you're going to want to close it up with some kind of cap. This is simply something you can take a PVC cap and cover the exposed end with, or get something 3D printed, whatever. Just make sure the exposed end is covered and airtight. This can even be done with a second threaded screw lid. Now make sure you have some way to refill this thing. You can do this by using the bottom part I just described and making that into a threaded cap you can remove, or you can drill a hole somewhere in the bottom of the vessel and have a cap for that hole. You just need some way to open up the vessel, put in the fluid, and then reseal and make it airtight and secure. You're also going to want to find a way to pressurize it. That can usually be done through the release mechanism by just engaging that release mechanism and shooting your propellant in through there. Now, propellants, you can use butane, CO2, or compressed air. Those are all viable as long as they don't react with your formula. So once you've got your vehicles to fill and pressurize your vessel, and you've got everything else done, don't pressurize or fill it yet. There's still one crucial step that we need to fulfill. We need to reinforce this pressure vessel. Otherwise you run the risk of having it deform or burst more easily. You can do this with actual duct tape, as in the metal tape for duct work. Don't use the regular duct tape that you just buy commonly. Actually go out to a hardware store, find actual duct tape. Or, personally, I would recommend FiberFix. Now this is what I'm using in my shooter, and this is a cloth tape covered in a resin that you dip in water and you wrap around your pressure vessel, and it will eventually harden stronger than steel. And of course that's what I'm using, and it can be a little bit hazardous, so if you do use this FiberFix, then wear gloves, have some kind of protection for your clothes and your eyes, because it can get on your clothes, and make sure you be quick about wrapping your pressure vessel, because it can dry really quickly. So now you know how to build a basic pressure vessel. So I mentioned that you may have noticed a problem with the aerosol can type design. So what is that problem? Well, let's take a look at a small visual demonstration. So we've got our pressure vessel with the straw, and we've just filled up our pressure vessel. We're going to go out and do whatever it is we're going to do. We go around, we use up some of our fluid, we then decide maybe we'll lie down and try to keep a low profile so some crime perpetrator doesn't see us. We're lying there, we're waiting till he's alone. He's standing there completely vulnerable. We're about to go down and detain him. It's the perfect moment to strike. We lift the shooter, push the trigger. Psst. Psst. Nope. Nothing comes out of the shooter but gas. You didn't run out of fluid though, so what was the problem here? Here's what happens inside your pressure vessel as the fluid runs down, and you have the pressure vessel along your wrist as if you were shooting it. So take a look at this small diagram here. See that? The fluid level goes below the straw, thus causing only the gas to be pushed out, since that's the only thing making contact with the straw. Now, just given the nature of how these vessels work, there might be some excess fluid left in the straw, but do you really want to take that chance? So the question is, how do you avoid this problem? Now, don't get me wrong, for the majority of applications, the straw feeding method will probably work. I mean, it worked for me with my weed sprayer vessel. But how do we achieve something a little bit more reliable? Well, you can always gravity feed your formula, meaning you perpetually have your pressure vessel pointed down, so that gravity does the work that the propellant would normally do. But still, that doesn't really allow for omnidirectional shooting. No, the only concept that I've found that truly allows for reliable omnidirectional extrusion is GPM 3.0, this GPM concept. Now, this is the evolution of a disproven concept I came up with some time ago. I'll probably talk about that in a different Small Talks episode. I'll talk about the failed versions of GPM, but right now we'll just talk about GPM 3.0 because that's the one that works. So how does this GPM concept work? Well, GPM stands for gas-powered piston. It's simple, really. Just take a look at this diagram. You have a basic pressure vessel base, with a hole on top and a hole on the bottom. Simple enough. The hole on top is where the formula is extruded into the spinneret or tubing or whatever. The hole on the bottom is where a constant source of pressure, like a CO2 canister, is attached. So what's the big idea here? Why is this such a reliable method? Well, it's simple. You take a piston, piece of plastic or metal, conformed exactly snugly to the inside of the pressure vessel. You put it inside the pressure vessel. That's going to separate the fluid and propellant sections of the container. This simply goes into the basic chemistry and pneumatic concept that if you have a constant amount of fluid, the volume of the container decreases, your pressure will increase. Then, as the equilibrium concept states, the fluid will exit the shooter. The dynamic volume for the fluid with the GPM concept means no gas bubbles, and it means reliable shooting in all directions that the pressure vessel could be oriented. It's that simple. The only real downsides to this are that the volume of the piston you insert will, of course, slightly decrease the total amount of fluid you can carry, but it's fairly negligible, to be honest. And you have to be very precise with this piston. If your piston is not super snug and conformed to the inside of the container, then gas is going to come between the vessel walls and the piston, and it's going to pollute your fluid supply, and of course you don't want that. The only other thing you have to watch out for with the GPM concept is that you have to make sure that your formula's solvent is not going to dissolve the piston itself. Now, with my current shooter, that's not even an issue, but that's something to look at in Project Update 5. Alright, I think that's really all I have to say on pressure vessels. I'd like to thank you for bearing with me through this episode. I know it was a little bit more heavy this time, but I hope you learned a lot about the pressure vessel in today's episode. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll answer them there or in the next Small Talks episode. Let me know also if you have any requests for future Web Talks episodes or videos. But with that, thank you for watching. SpiderDevice out.
Be more careful with this one.